Have you ever walked away from a conversation after saying everything you thought you needed to, only to feel like you lost anyway? Have you felt that tightening in your throat, that ache in your chest, like every word spoken somehow stripped away more of your strength? Maybe you're surrounded by loud voices. People who interrupt, dominate, mock. People who mistake arrogance for confidence. And maybe somewhere deep inside you believe that staying silent was weakness. That not defending yourself meant you had surrendered. That walking away without a fight meant you lost. But what if I told you all of that is a lie? What if the real power has never been in what you say, but in what you choose not to? Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most misunderstood thinkers in history, saw something most of us miss. He believed that those who talk too much reveal too much. That those who need to convince others are already standing on shaky ground. The world teaches us to fight with words, to defend our beliefs, to jump into every debate like it's a battle for truth. But nature, real nature, suggests something else entirely. A path that is subtle, lethal, infinitely more intelligent. Nietzsche believed that silence is not emptiness. It is presence. It is power. It is the kind of pressure that forces the other person to wrestle with their own discomfort. Because silence disorients, it destabilizes, it confronts. This message is for you, the one who feels ignored, invalidated, overlooked. The one who leaves conversations wondering why no one really listened. The one who's tired of always being the one who keeps the peace while others keep crossing the line. Maybe you've confused your silence with weakness. But today, I want to show you something different. That silence, your silence, can become your greatest weapon. That victory isn't about winning the argument. It's about never needing to enter one in the first place. Get ready to see silence not as absence, but as your most deliberate, potent form of communication. Because here's the truth. Why do we feel this constant need to respond, to explain, to prove we're right? Because we've been conditioned to believe that truth must be defended loudly, urgently, with force. That if we stay quiet, we're giving in. But Nietzsche would say that this is not strength, it's fear. Fear of being seen as weak. Fear of being dismissed. Fear of being questioned. And what hides behind that fear? The ego. A fragile ego desperately clinging to control. One that turns disagreement into an attack. That turns a simple discussion into emotional warfare. Nietzsche said most people don't enter arguments seeking truth. They enter to seek power. They don't want understanding. They want control. And when you feel the need to defend yourself to prove your worth, you've already entered their game and lost. Because the moment you try to justify your position, it shows you're still seeking approval, still trying to be seen, still longing to be validated. Nietzsche called this herd morality. It's the behavior of those who live for others' approval, of those who want to be seen as good, as right, as just, but this craving to be accepted. It's exactly what keeps you powerless, because true strength isn't in convincing others. It's in not needing to. It's in holding your ground even when misunderstood. It's in remaining calm when mocked. It's in walking away from a fight you could easily win because your peace is worth more than the point. Nietzsche challenges us to consider a different kind of power. Not the power to dominate others, but the power to master yourself. A power that doesn't show up in raised voices, but in a steady gaze. A power that doesn't lash out but watches, because when you stop reacting, you stop losing. Here's what you need to know. Every argument is a stage, and the first person to take the bait is already playing a role. The reactive mind is a weak mind, but the observing mind, that's the one that terrifies people, because it doesn't play by the rules. It doesn't get dragged into drama. It doesn't need to win. It already has. But then you ask, if I don't speak up, how do I show my strength? If words fail me, how do I make my presence felt? Nietzsche had an answer. And it lives in the concept of the Übermensch, the one who rises above ordinary morality, the one who doesn't follow the crowd, the one who lives by a deeper code. The Übermensch doesn't dominate through loudness, but through presence. Not through arguments, but through clarity. They don't react. They choose. They don't beg to be understood. They understand themselves. Their silence is not weakness. It is mastery. In the next part, we'll explore this idea more deeply. We'll look at how the Übermensch teaches us to wield silence not as escape but as power. as strategy, as dominance. Because when you realize that silence is not surrender but sovereignty, you'll stop chasing validation and start commanding respect without saying a single word. Let's continue. You're closer than you think. If silence was your first revelation, then what comes next may just change how you navigate the world forever. Because from here on out, silence begins to speak louder than any voice in the room. If this message is resonating with you, if it feels like a mirror you've needed for a long time, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps this movement grow. Let's continue. Nietzsche didn't write for the masses. He wrote for the few, those bold enough to look within to confront their shadows and transform their misery into strength. In his view, the common person is imprisoned by convention's morality and a desperate need for external applause. They chase approval like oxygen. But there is another kind of human, rare, dangerous, free, the Übermensch. This figure doesn't live in reaction to the world. He reshapes the world to reflect himself. And what's most astonishing, he often does this without uttering a single word. The Übermensch doesn't argue. He doesn't seek cheap emotional victories. He observes. He calculates. He speaks rarely, and when he does, it matters. More importantly, he knows the supreme power of knowing when to remain silent. Why? Because silence is not emptiness. It is influence. It is presence. It is the tension in the air that forces others to face themselves. The silence of the Übermensch is not passive. It is charged. It holds weight. It commands. While others raise their voices, he raises his gaze. While others stumble over explanations, he watches calm, composed, unnerving. His silence becomes a wall, and those on the other side, they panic, they project, they scramble to fill the void with noise. And in their desperation, they make mistakes. They reveal their weakness. They lose their balance. This silence is not submission. It is mastery. The Übermensch understands that every word spoken is a move revealed. Every emotional outburst is an exposed weakness. So he waits, not because he has nothing to say, but because he no longer needs to say it. His presence already speaks, and what it says is unsettling, because it forces others to confront their own noise, their own confusion. In a world addicted to sound, the one who masters silence becomes a king. Nietzsche saw the Übermensch as one who creates his own values, who writes his own moral code, who does not rely on validation or permission to exist. That's why he is so feared, because nothing is more intimidating than someone who cannot be manipulated by guilt, fear, or a hunger to be liked. His silence becomes his shield, and when he chooses to speak, it is not chatter. It is an earthquake. But this raises a critical question. Why is silence so unsettling? Why does someone's refusal to react feel so threatening? What happens inside a person's mind when the expected argument is replaced by overwhelming stillness? The answer lies not just in philosophy, but in psychology. And that's exactly what we'll explore next. Because to understand the power of silence, you must first understand the chaos it causes in others. Silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's a mirror. And what it reflects can be unbearable. When you choose not to react, you are not just refusing to speak. You're forcing the other person to sit with themselves, to hear their own words echo back without resistance, to confront the void where conflict was expected. And that shakes people, because most people don't speak to connect. They speak to defend, to distract, to avoid. Most don't argue to seek truth. They argue to hide the gap between who they pretend to be and who they really are. So when you meet that with silence, their disguise begins to unravel. Social psychologists have proven that in confrontation, silence is often perceived as judgment. Even if you're just listening, the speaker starts to feel exposed. They second-guess themselves. Their fear kicks in. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, activates. Adrenaline spikes, and the mind spirals. Are they judging me? Did they spot my lie? Do they know I'm bluffing? In that psychological storm, silence becomes a blade, a weapon that doesn't cut skin but pierces the soul. Nietzsche understood this long before neuroscience did. To him, the average person is enslaved to impulse. They speak out of vanity, react out of ego, perform out of fear. But the one who has mastered himself, he is different. He remains quiet not because he is indifferent, but because he knows every word he gives away is a tactical loss. Every emotional outburst is a spotlight shining on his softest spot. And here's where it gets even more powerful. Silence destroys manipulation. People who thrive on emotional control need reactions to survive. They feed on your anger, your defensiveness, your confusion. When you give them silence, you cut off their oxygen. They panic, they spiral, they fall apart. Because without your response to anchor themselves, they lose their sense of dominance. And in that vacuum, they expose what they've worked so hard to conceal. But silence doesn't just reveal others, it also awakens pain. It reopens wounds of abandonment, rejection, and humiliation. Suddenly, the person across from you is forced to face the truth. They are not the center. Their words are not enough. Their presence alone doesn't move you. And that for many is unbearable. In the last section, we saw how silence disarms others, how it unravels egos, confuses manipulators, and awakens hidden wounds. But now we move deeper, because understanding silence is one thing. Learning to use it as a weapon, that changes everything. Silence isn't just a defense mechanism, it's a strategic force. And from this moment on, it's no longer something you stumble into, it's something you wield. But here's the truth, using silence takes strength. A kind of strength that most people never develop. Why? Because silence goes against every impulse you've been trained to follow. You've been taught to respond, to explain, to justify, to defend. But the moment you do, you reveal that you still care about being seen, being right, being accepted. And that's the trap. True silence begins when you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. When you realize the truth doesn't need to be spoken to exist. Let's explore how to transform silence from a passive retreat into an active weapon of presence, power, and psychological precision. The first move is also the hardest. Be silent when every nerve in your body screams for a reaction, when the insult lands, when the accusation hits, when the moment begs you to explain yourself. Don't, because every time you give in to that impulse, you show your hand, you give them your energy, you reveal your need, and that need is their weapon. Kill that urge. Let it die in your throat, because that's the moment silence becomes strength, not weakness. Most people listen to reply, but not you. You listen like a predator, like a tactician. You hear the fear between the words. You watch for contradictions. You spot the arrogance that's just insecurity wearing a mask, and you store it, all of it, because when you choose to speak, it will be surgical. Not loud, not long, but devastating. Silence isn't a void, it's tension. And tension is power. Let silence stretch. Let it breathe. Let it make them uncomfortable. Because while they wait for your reaction and get none, their mind turns against them. They fill the silence with assumptions, with fears, with projection. And in that moment, they lose their center. One glance, one inhale, one silent pause is louder than 1,000 speeches. Once you master silence, you become unpredictable. And unpredictable people are feared. Not because they're violent, but because they're unreadable. When others can't predict your reaction, they lose their advantage. They hesitate. They rethink. They adjust. And in that moment, you gain control not through dominance, but through calm. You are no longer reactive. You are the gravitational center of the room. This is not silence as absence. This is silence as dominance. But be warned, there's a difference between being silent and being passive. Nietzsche never advocated for weakness. The silence we speak of is not hollow. It is not empty. It is not born of fear. It is loaded. It is charged. It is controlled. You are not retreating. You are positioning. And when you do speak, when you finally release a single sentence, it lands like lightning. Not because it's louder, but because it's precise. Because it ends the discussion. Because it is undeniably true. But now we face the shadow side. Because up until this point, silence has been power. But what happens when silence is no longer strategy, but surrender? There are moments when silence doesn't protect you, it imprisons you. When it's no longer a tool of strength, but a symptom of fear. When someone uses you, manipulates you, dominates you, and you say nothing. When you swallow your anger. Avoid every conflict. Convince yourself that peace is always better. That's not strength. That's domesticated submission. And Nietzsche saw it clearly. What you call maturity may be a mask for fear. What you call peace may be the price of your self-betrayal. Have you noticed how some people exploit your silence? How they push their agendas, take your space, rewrite the rules while you nod and back away? You tell yourself it's not worth it, that you're above the drama, that you're keeping the peace, but the truth, you're paying for that false peace every day. And they know it. They know you won't speak. They know you won't push back. They know your silence isn't power, it's a green light. Nietzsche called this the morality of slaves. It's the value system created by the weak to survive among the strong. The gospel of guilt, of self-denial, of always being nice. It's the belief that your silence makes you noble, but in reality it makes you invisible. You shrink, you vanish. And worse, you feel proud for it. But you don't have to live that way anymore, because now you've seen both sides. You've seen silence as power, and silence as prison. In the next part, we'll learn how to break free from the false morality that's kept you quiet, and how to rebuild a version of silence that doesn't make you disappear, but makes you undeniable. Stay with me. We're just beginning to rise. You've seen how silence can either be your sharpest blade or your silent prison. But Nietzsche didn't write for those who resign themselves to invisibility. He wrote for those bold enough to shatter their own shackles. Those who, upon realizing they're being used, manipulated, or muted, decide that enough is enough. Because when you accept silence as a form of submission, you surrender your power often without even knowing it. You begin to shrink under the weight of others' expectations. You shapeshift to fit their needs. And in doing so, you lose touch with yourself. This is the opposite of what Nietzsche called the will to power. True power is not shouting louder. It's not dominating others. It's dominating yourself. It's reclaiming your inner authority, the ability to be silent, not because you are afraid, but because you owe no one an explanation. That old silence, the silence of submission, it must die, and in its place, a new silence must rise. A silence of presence, a silence that stands tall without explanation, that doesn't apologize for existing, that shifts the energy of a room without speaking a word. This is the silence Nietzsche would respect. The silence of the individual who has conquered themselves. But how do you get there? How do you move from being shaped by others to becoming the sculptor of your own life? How do you kill the herd morality within you and rise as someone who emanates power even in stillness? The answer lies in the most powerful archetype of Nietzsche's work, the Übermensch. We've mentioned him. Now it's time to understand how to become him. The Übermensch is not a superhero. He is not superior in domination, but in sovereignty. He does not ask for permission to be. He does not seek validation. He does not play by inherited rules. He writes his own. This isn't about ego, it's about essence. The Übermensch doesn't live reactively. He lives creatively. He doesn't exist to fit in. He exists to reshape. He has replaced his need for applause with the quiet thunder of self-respect. In his silence, it's not retreat. It's a statement, because when you know who you are, you don't need to say it. You emanate it. We've reached the final point, and here is the truth that cannot be whispered. It must be carved into your understanding. Silence is not absence. It is not emptiness. It is not the space between sentences. True silence is presence. It is clarity. It is self-possession. It is the stillness of someone who no longer reacts to the world, but reshapes it by simply existing. Nietzsche never wrote for those who settle. He wrote for those who transcend. He wrote for those brave enough to peel away every mask society forced onto them, even when it hurts. Because the silence of the Übermensch is not the silence of the victim. It's not the silence of the coward. It's the silence of the warrior who's already won. He no longer needs to argue. He no longer needs to be understood. He is. And he knows what he deserves. Now pause. Look at your life. How many times have you kept silent out of fear, out of guilt, out of not wanting to inconvenience anyone? How often have you let others decide for you, speak for you, override your truth enough? Nietzsche would say to live like that is an insult to existence. To accept that kind of silence is to betray yourself. From today forward, your silence must change tone. It can no longer be an escape. It must become an invisible roar, a boundary, an exclamation. An affirmation of who you are, even if no one else gets it. Because your existence isn't a question, it's a declaration. And declarations don't beg to be understood. They demand to be lived. That takes courage. Do you have it? If you do, let it be known. Comment below. I choose the silence that commands respect. Not just to let me know you made it here, but so you can affirm out loud that this is your line in the sand. This is your new story. And remember, words have power, even when they speak of silence.